Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be diving into episodes 772 through 774, which will cover manga chapters 819 through 821. And yeah, if you thought the amazing lore drops and world building were done with the last several episodes, think again, because we've still got even more in these episodes, which is absolutely nuts. So let's get into the synopsis. With the alliance now formed, they continue to learn more about the Minks and the Wano samurai and their startling connection with the Pirate King himself, Goldie Roger. However, before things can really get going, Zunesha, the elephant, comes under attack from Jack, who has somehow made it back to Zou, and his mission is now to sink the elephant and the inhabitants on his back. Alright, so differences. So there are some major differences, but there aren't any, a lot of them. So the first one is the anime adds some refresher flashbacks to show us scenes of Luffy being protected by Marco during Marineford to kind of catch everyone back up as to who Marco even is. Another one is when Zunesha is first attacked by Jack. The anime has some of the more observant people notice something is about to happen, whether it's through observation haki or just pure animal instinct. However, in the manga, they're all caught by surprise once Zunesha starts to rock violently. I'm not sure why they decided to change this, to be honest. It doesn't really add or change anything. In fact, it might actually, imply something that maybe Oda never actually intended. So, yeah, a weird addition, to be honest. Maybe it was at the request of Oda. Who knows? The last change I noticed was the anime also shows a lot more people being impacted by the sudden movement of Zunesha. You see a lot of people being, in trouble or hurt or hurled around. And so you get a lot more scenes of just people in Zou just being impacted by the fact that Zunesha is just rocking back and forth. But yeah, so those are kind of the major changes that I noticed. So let's get into the episodes themselves. So coming off of the epic coming together of this newly formed super alliance between the ninja, pirate, mink, and samurai, right off the bat though, the conversation between Wanda, Carrot, and Pedro is another pretty huge indication and clue that there are some time shenanigans happening. Based on the comments from Nekomamushi and Inuarashi, it would indicate that from Momo's experience, it will have only been a few months since the tragedy with his father occurred, and Momo's last memory of them were when they were on good terms with each other. But then here, Carrot says that she has only known them to be each other, at each other's throats, which by each other I meant Nekomamushi and Inuarashi. We don't quite know Carrot's age, but she has got to be anywhere from her late teens to early 20s. Although I suppose we don't know if minks have any sort of differing lifespans like giants do. But assuming they don't, there's no way that 15 plus years have passed and Momo is still only 8 years old, which is very interesting because the concept of time travel is something I'm always very hesitant to be introduced in any story because it can create a lot of plot holes or lessening of stakes. And Harry Potter is a good example of that. The time turner is just completely threw a wrench into sort of just sort of making sense in the world. However, when I started to catch on to this devil fruit potential, that there would be something like this, I knew immediately what that devil fruit would be called if there ever was sort of a time manipulation or time travel fruit, because it's so easy to tell what this name would be. It would be called the Toki Toki no Mi, since Toki means time, and it easily fits into that sort of the devil fruit naming convention. So this is something that I had sort of predicted back when this sort of chapter dropped, or this sort of time frame in Zou when it became apparent that there could potentially be some sort of time traveling involved here. Back in the whale tree, I love this scene where we get to see Luffy espouse his idea of what an alliance is, which he mentions that they shouldn't bow their heads to each other anymore. And in a callback to Punk Hazard, when he first entered into the alliance with Law, he makes it clear that an alliance means that they're all friends now, to which Law emphatically retorts, "That's wrong." But I love that Luffy's definition of an alliance is not that one side is trying to get more out of the arrangement than the other, but that they're all working together to help each other, and whatever it takes to get each other's best interests, whether it's imbalanced or not, who cares? It's just all about helping each other. which is something that I always appreciate about Luffy. But yeah, with the alliance established, Luffy has one condition that Raizo funnily points out that that's probably something they should have, decided on before forming and agreeing to the alliance. But Luffy wants everyone to wait for him to retrieve Sanji from Big Mom. And my favorite part is just how much stock he puts into Sanji's strength, telling them that it'll be worth the wait because Sanji is worth 1,000 men, which we all know he's not wrong. Like, Sanji is insanely strong. But Zoro, hearing this, gets a little jealous and mentions that, well, then he's worth 20 or 2,000 people. And I love this pettiness from Zoro, even while Sanji is kind of in trouble. We then see Jack and his forces rediscover Zunesha and are approaching Zou again. And one thing that has still remained kind of a mystery to me to this day is how Jack keeps finding Zou. And it's also a mystery to the characters in the story too. And this to my knowledge has never really been fully explained. Like, he must have a reliable way of finding it if he's able to find it twice consistently within a short amount of time. And I know some people have speculated that he must have like a Vivera card for Zunesha itself, since it's a living being, but how did he acquire it? And during this time, there was rampant theorizing that there was a traitor among the Minks, or maybe even among one of the samurai. And I had a hard time believing that, and I will discuss this a little more maybe in the spoiler section. But even with the current day spoilers, there really hasn't been a good answer for this, I feel like. And if you do know the answer, let me know, because I haven't been able to figure this out yet. And in any case, regardless of how, he was able to get back, Jack has returned, but this time with the goal of not going after the Minks on Zunesha, but Zunesha itself, which seems unfathomable to take down something that freaking huge. But back on Zou, with the alliance all settled, Luffy can now turn his attention back to the fact that both Nekomamushi and Inuarashi knew and sailed with Shanks. But it's here we get even more bombshell reveals that they not only knew Shanks, but they also sailed with the Pirate King himself, Goldie Roger. They explained that they weren't necessarily a part of the Pirate King's crew and never made it to Laugh Tale, but more or less accompanied their master Oden, who, as he was scouted by Roger from Whitebeard's crew, which means that Oden, Nekomamushi, and Inuarashi began their pirate journey as members of Whitebeard's crew, which is also crazy. And as they talk about their journey, it sounds eerily similar to the Straw Hats' journey, talking about Sky Islands and Fishman Island, which makes sense as we did see that Roger did make it to Skypiea and the Upper Yard, where Robin found Roger's inscription in the Shandoran Belfry. Now things are starting to line up, because this thought gave me chills when I started putting all this information together. We just learned that the Kozuki clan can read and write the language of the poneglyph, and that Oden was the last in the line of the Kozuki clan who had those skills. This means that Roger recruited him, probably with the explicit intent to have him help with deciphering the poneglyphs to find Laugh Tale and the One Piece. This also means that Roger probably wasn't the one that wrote that inscription on the Shandoran Belfry. He probably had Oden write it for him. And this was such a cool and crazy reveal and callback to a monumental moment that was a very intriguing mystery that was set up nearly 14 years prior. Kinemon, Kanjuro, and Raizo didn't join Oden, but I love how friendly Nekomamushi and Inuarashi are now, and that they're back to their old best friend ways. And Usopp is expressing what we were all thinking, like, weren't you guys just ready to kill each other like a little bit ago? And this revelation that they traveled with Roger naturally would also pique Frankie's interest too, as they sailed on his master Tom's designed ship, the Oro Jackson, which they expressed they knew Tom. Not only that, but Brook then chimes in with his own question about Crocus, since he knew that Crocus also served on Roger's crew as his doctor. But unfortunately, Nami interrupts him due to the fact that the mention of Crocus, and I'm sure that reminded her of how he explained the logs to her 2 years ago. She, along with many of us, assumed, based on his explanation, that you would eventually reach Laugh Tale if you kept following the logs, and that the One Piece, as long as you followed all of that. But now, as Inuarashi explains it, that the end of the logs would not take you to Laugh Tale, but a singular island that details all the secrets of the poneglyphs and Laugh Tale, which meant that once Roger reached that island, he had to start all over and make the journey a second time with all this new knowledge that he had to now look for the poneglyphs and clues about the ancient kingdom to find the true ending, aka the existence of Laugh Tale. Now that is crazy. Now it has become clear why Goldie Roger was considered such a great pirate and the Pirate King, because he went around the Grand Line not once but twice. Once was just a journey to see if he could reach the end, and then upon reaching it, he discovered on that island that it contained some information about the existence of another island that had the One Piece and information on where to find clues to reach that hidden island, aka Laptail, which meant that now he had to travel the Grand Line once again, but this time with the sole purpose of looking for these clues. And reading this was freaking wild. Like, luckily for Nami and them, they weren't, they're not deviating from the correct course, nor will they need to traverse the world a second time, because thanks to Roger, they already have that information and are technically following the second run through. It's almost like picking up Roger's New Game Plus save and doing it, which is, if you're a video game fan, you kind of know what that means. But being confirmed correct by Inuarashi, the whole crew is just super proud of Nami, and Luffy can't help but praise her. But he's so excited that he can't help but like pat her on the back. But he's just like slapping her over and over and over, just like pat, 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 pat. And this leads Nami to be like all like blushing, but at the same time just like snaps at him. It's like, this hurts. And so that's always funny to see. With the history lesson over, though, they now move to make the many preparations needed to face Kaido, and Nekomamushi then drops yet another huge name. Nekomamushi seems to know and might be able to get Marco, the former 1st Division captain of the Whitebeard crew, to help them, which would be another insane huge get. This fact is not lost on anyone except for Luffy, who is seen struggling mightily in the back trying to remember this somewhat familiar name. And this part is too funny as being on brand for Luffy. Like, despite everyone dropping all these huge things Marco is known for, the thing that ultimately gets him to remember is Robin pointing out that he looks like a pineapple. Which is true. But with the conversation surrounding Marco, it's here we get a bit more information on the grudge war that was waged by the remnants of the Whitebeard pirates against the Blackbeard pirates that we heard mentioned by Jinbei back on Fishman Island. But ultimately, they suffered a crushing defeat, as Robin puts it, and this is ultimately what led to Blackbeard being elevated to a Yonko Emperor. And most of this information we already knew or could piece together based on clues we were given, but all of this is new to Luffy. But this then sets up Nekomamushi to see if he can find Marco and recruit him to their cause, as they seem to be good friends, no doubt from their days on the Whitebeard pirate crew. And getting Marco would be a huge boost to their power, and it makes you wonder if they can get the other division captains. But the fact that he specifically mentions only Marco, it might be just the one. And this settles it that everyone has their sort of specific goals and objectives to complete before they all reconvene on Wano once the preparations are made for this big war against the Beast Pirates. Nami, Chopper, and Brook volunteer to join Luffy on his quest to retrieve Sanji to help navigate and to treat Peckham's, with Brook kind of tagging along because he also feels responsible as he was with Sanji when he was taken from them. So makes sense that those are the guys that are there. And this is a great way for Oda to actually now focus on the characters that were largely absent from Dressrosa and give the Dressrosa half of the Straw Hats a break, which is smart on his part. And while it does suck that we keep getting the crew split up, but for Oda, this makes the most sense as it allows him a bit more freedom and flexibility in terms of writing, since he doesn't need to service and devote time to as many characters. But before they can do anything, Zunesha suddenly starts to violently move because it's under attack from Jack, causing a huge earthquake. However, as this happens, something very curious begins to happen as Luffy, for some reason, starts calling out to someone saying, there's this disembodied voice talking to him. And Momo also begins to say the same thing. No one else can hear these voices outside of the pair. And then we can hear some voice pleading, "If you're there, hurry, please give me an order." And it's clear that who they're hearing is the elephant Zunesha itself communicating to Luffy and Momo through some telepathic means. And you're hit with the realization that this is the ability, the voice of all things. Pedro then explains that both Roger and Oden had this strange ability too, although Pedro himself doesn't seem to know that it's called the voice of all things. Just that the pair also mentioned being able to hear some voice but never able to get a response from Zunesha. However, Momo, unlike the others, could not only hear Zunesha, he was able to see glimpses of what Zunisha was seeing, making Momo seemingly have a more powerful affinity with the voice of all things, or at least with Zunisha, and perhaps a very special connection with Zunisha itself. Momo then reveals that Zunisha committed some crime and is bound to follow one order, and that's to continuously walk the earth, which is a very interesting, and this is something I might talk about a little bit more in the spoiler section as well. But he needs permission from Momonosuke to fight back this one time, and this is freaking nuts. I remember at the time thinking that this seemed very familiar to the situation with Shirahoshi and the Sea Kings. Like, she was a child of royalty who could telepathically speak to and command creatures that were massive in scale. And now we have yet another royal child able to command another huge beast, which cannot be a coincidence. And Momo has no idea what is going on and is having Zunisha's thoughts just crashing through his head, pleading with Momo to allow him to fight back this one time. And it's Luffy, of all people, the one also able to hear Zunisha, that he has to be the one to yell out and give the command. After hesitating a bit, Momo finally screams out for the elephant to fight back and drive Jack away. And to Luffy and Momo's shock, he responds and receives the order. And now we get one of the most insane things, as we see an elephant the size of a small country erase a fleet of warships like it was swatting away some dust, utterly obliterating Jack and his entire forces into literal dust. Momonosuke, along with Shirahoshi, has just unlocked an insane skill, if you can call it that. To be able to command Zunisha to attack on his behalf is an incredibly powerful ally to have, and Luffy even casually jokes about having this elephant on their side now would be cool. And this is such a crazy development, though. Is Zunisha or Momo another ancient weapon like Shirahoshi? This thought did cross my mind, but I couldn't quite place it, whether it was, Uranus or not. We know it can't be, or at least highly unlikely, that it's Pluton, since we know that Pluton is an actual battleship with plans that Frankie burned to protect. So the only other, option it could be was Uranus. But by this point in the story, it was widely thought that Uranus would be an air-based weapon, following this sort of trend that Poseidon is underwater, Pluton would be on the water, and Uranus would be above the water. But obviously that's kind of like our own sort of fan headcanon at the time, so it couldn't really be confirmed. So Zunisha could have easily been Uranus, the third ancient weapon. Also, can we just take a second to talk about how insane Jack is? He thought it was a good idea to attack an elephant that's 5 kilometers or 3+ miles tall, according to its Vivarcard databook entry, which is more than half the height of Mount Everest, because Everest is 8.8 kilometers. It's just insane. And Oda does kind of address it when Inuarashi mentions that he didn't even know that Zunisha had a will of its own, and that it was even capable of thought. So it could be that maybe many, including Jack, believed that it was just brain dead and it wasn't really an animal, and just started firing cannonballs at it repeatedly, hoping that it wouldn't actually defend itself. Which I feel like it's, even if he thought that, it's still a living thing. So you'd think it would just act out of self-preservation at some point. But yeah, well, Jack effed around and found out real hard, as he's now at the bottom of the ocean, presumably dead, since he's a devil fruit user, unless one of his subordinates is strong enough to keep someone that large afloat. So yeah, this may be the last time we see Jack. But the episode ends with a shot on that snowy island that we saw Drake looking for Kaido on. And here we see Kaido now presumably found, answering Addendum Mushi, and to our surprise, it's Apu calling Kaido to inform him that communication with Jack has been cut off. And this is surprising because the last time we saw Apu, he was being attacked by Kaido himself, as he, Hawkins, and Kid were negotiating an alliance, but now it would seem that Apu, maybe in an attempt to save his ass, submitted to Kaido, just as Deus Drake did with Kaido, and as well as how Bedge had done with Big Mom. At least that was my thinking at the time. I had a really hard time seeing Kid submitting to anyone, though, no matter what the situation was, so we don't quite know what happened to him. Hawkins, I didn't really have a good pulse on who he was, and thus I wasn't really able to kind of come to my own conclusion as to what course of action he would end up taking, whether he would submit or whether he would defy Kaido and end up either being killed or taken prisoner or whatever it was. But yeah, that we'll eventually see what happened to all three of them truly. But with that, the wheels are in motion from all sides of the conflict, and it's now time for Luffy to make preparations to head to Whole Cake Island to get Sanji back, while everyone else prepares for the coming war with Kaido and the Beast Pirates. And so yeah, look forward to the next episode as we get more into that. But if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. I really appreciate it. It helps a lot. And yeah, you guys have been really great. The downloads and the likes and comments have been pretty great. So thank you so much. If you want to check, join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, also please consider subscribing. That also helps a lot. And check out my Instagram at SunnyGo Podcast for updates on when I post new episodes and to see pictures of my manga collection. As always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. Small spoiler section, I kind of want to touch on a few things that we mentioned earlier. But if you're not interested in that, stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye. So yeah, there's obviously a lot of spoiler stuff we could talk about, like the time travel with the Toki Toki no Mi and all of that. But I think I'm not really gonna talk too much about that, because that stuff's pretty self-explanatory. We eventually get that story. I think the thing that really interested me going back over these at chapters and episodes is Zunesha and his crimes. That statement has kind of loomed in my head for a while now. And especially now, like, what were those crimes? What was his relationship with Joy Boy? And did he betray, he mentions that he betrayed Joy Boy. And so, yeah, I just wonder, like, now that we know about Imu and his ability to Dami Reversi and take control, I wonder if at some point he took control of Zunesha and used Zunesha against Joy Boy for some reason. And the other thing too is, like, Emmett also mentions that he failed Joy Boy, but I don't know if you can Dami Reversi a robot, or whether Emmett himself had like a spirit or a soul or something like that could actually be Dami Reversi'd. But it's interesting that two of these like colossal figures that were supposed to be allied with Joy Boy had somehow failed him both, which probably led to Joy Boy eventually losing to the 20 kings and the 20 kingdoms, I should say, and Imu. So yeah, I always found that line very interesting, and we don't quite have an answer for it yet. But I do wonder if maybe the Dami Reversi played a role in that. Now that we kind of have that information. The other thing I really found interesting that I completely forgot about is the fact that, like, in later on in chapter 967, Frankie meets Oden himself as a kid, and when the Roger pirates, they all went to Tom to get the Oro Jackson, Oden was already part of their crew, and so and they share like this small conversation. So it's kind of crazy to think that Frankie met Oden and knew Momonosuke's father. I just find that really interesting, like, but they don't remember each other because if you read those panels, Oden never actually introduces himself as Oden. So Frankie doesn't know his name. He just knows this as some weird dude that came up and asked him a couple questions while he was working on his battle Frankies, which is, yeah, I find that really crazy. And because this scene has to have taken place before Frankie's flashback, because by the time the flashback has started, Tom had already built the Oro Jackson, and so yeah, it would have been a very young memory for Frankie, but it is kind of crazy to see that chapter when you actually do get to read it. But yeah, those are kind of the two things I really wanted to talk about. Obviously, there are a lot more we could talk about, with Momo and Zunesha and the voice of all things, but I think that's better served talking about it when it actually comes up. So, but yeah, thanks for listening to my ramblings about the spoilers, and yeah, hope to see you on the next episode. See ya.